Welcome back. This is Gravitas, continuing the conversation on U.S.'s relationship with China. This after Secretary of State Rex Tillerson ended his first Asia trip after he met up with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Both leaders talked about how the United States and China need to work together on a slew of issues, specifically North Korea, and that cooperation is the only correct choice for both countries. Here's a report.
China and U.S.'s frosty relations are being put to the test. Washington's constant push on Beijing to intervene on North Korea's nuclear interests, well, that's not going too well with Chinese leaders. China is getting irritated with the U.S.'s decision to base an advanced missile defense system in South Korea. Trump has been unpredictable for China, attacking Beijing on trade, the South China Sea dispute, and talking to Taiwan leaders. China is also suspicious of U.S.'s intentions towards self-ruled Taiwan, which China claims its own. But those issues seemed brushed off when Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson met this week in Beijing. Tillerson told Jinping that Trump looks forward to working with China. China says it will enforce UN sanctions on North Korea, but that all sides have to get back to the negotiating table. Chinese leaders also say they don't really have as much influence over North Korea as American leaders believe. Before Tillerson's trip to Beijing, Trump said North Korea was behaving very badly and accused China of doing little to resolve the situation. China believes if poverty-struck North Korea is cut off, waves of refugees could enter northeastern China. Despite that, North Korea conducted the test of a new high-thrust engine rocket launch, which Kim Jong-un said was a successful test. North Korea has conducted 5 nuclear tests and at least 10 missile tests so far, defying UN sanctions. Xi Jinping, though, welcomed Trump to visit China. Trump will host his Chinese counterpart in Florida next month. Reporting, Archit Seshadri, WION.
Thank you very much.
Well, to get perspective on this story, we're now joined by another guest, Mr. Brahma Chalani. He's an expert on strategic affairs, as well as Glenn Carl from Boston, and of course our studio guest. Thank you again, Mr. Shiv Shankar Mukherjee. Appreciate all of your time. I'm going to start with Brahma firstly, just to get your thoughts on this. With regards to U.S. and China's relationship, I mean, we talked about U.S. and Germany, but then how is the U.S.-China relationship? This meeting looked like it went, at least on paper, well, but how important do you think this meeting between these leaders were? Brahma?
On the eve of the meeting of Mr. Tillerson with President Xi of China, President Trump sent out a tweet in which he directly criticized China's role on North Korea. So even before the meeting took place, the pitch had been cleared by Trump's tweet. What is more important is the fact that North Korea is seeking to escape from China's clutches. It wants a direct engagement with Washington. For years, the North Koreans have been seeking direct talks with the United States. But the US is seeking to outsource its China policy to China even now, and that only increases the anger in Pyongyang. So we have a comical situation where North wants to deal with Washington directly, face to face, but Washington insists that China pressure North Korea and be the mediator between Washington and Pyongyang.
Let me go to Glenn Clark. Glenn, I saw you showing some expression with regards to that. Your thoughts on U.S. and China's relationship, especially this meeting. So let's compare it. Let's talk about, the U.S.-Germany thing that we talked about. That meeting, we heard, was a little bit frosty versus this meeting with Tillerson and Xi Jinping. I mean, can we say that that meeting went a little bit better, perhaps? Or is all of this just the U.S. sort of spreading its wings to, build its allies?
Did it go better? Gosh, I don't know if the standard, maybe it's a too low a standard to the meeting with Angela Merkel. And that's not a criticism of Angela Merkel as a point of comparison. The dilemma for everybody is that North Korea is about as unpredictable in its behavior as Donald Trump is, at least in his rhetoric. The negotiations that my counterpart just alluded to, that North Korea seeks with the U.S., they have occurred over the last 15 years. This is something I've sporadically worked on when I was an officer. But the frustration from the U.S. perspective is that North Korea obtains largely what it seeks in the short term, which is to avoid increasing pressure while it continues with its missile and nuclear weapons development program. And then it doesn't really live up to any particular obligation that it has. And it sees its periodic famines alleviated by U.S. and other international aid.
Right.
The problem with the U.S.-China dynamic is that, as you pointed out quite accurately, China is, I think, reasonably concerned that it would have possibly 20 million starving, and I'm speaking literally, North Koreans seeking help by crossing the border if a dramatic crisis comes and the regime were ever to collapse through sanctions or a war or something like that. And China does not want to see American influence extending to the Yalu River, the border with China of North Korea, for the first time since 1950. So U.S. objectives to pressure China, which does have the most influence over North Korea, conflict with Chinese objectives to keep the U.S. influence constrained. How one squares that circle, no one has ever figured out.
All right, so before we continue the conversation, while we talk about North Korea, let's get some perspective on that. U.S. and Chinese leaders met. On the brinks of all this, North Korea on Saturday conducted a test of a high-performance rocket engine. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said the test was successful on the new birth of the country's rocket industry. Now, according to reports, the high-thrust engine would help North Korea achieve world-class satellite launch capability. Reports have also surfaced that the test, which was aimed at a new type of rocket engine for long-range missiles, was hailing the launch. That's according to Kim Jong-un. Let's look at what he said. Quote, "The development and the completion of the new type high-thrust engine would help consolidate the scientific and technological foundation to match the world-level satellite delivery capability in the field of outer space development." He also added that the country is close to the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Well, so far, North Korea has successfully conducted 5 nuclear tests as well as 10 missile tests so far. Mr. Mukherjee, let me bring you back into the conversation. With regards to North Korea, how concerned is the United States? I mean, certainly this meeting with U.S. and China was, to a certain extent, to address North Korea, the concerns that they have about nuclear tests. How important is that relationship, specifically on the North Korea front?
Well, I think the U.S.-China relationship is probably the most important relationship in the, not just in Asia, affecting Asia, but the world at large. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And I agree totally with both the panelists who just spoke that at this particular meeting,
right,
North Korea loomed large as probably the subject that took up most of their time and effort. Quite apart from the hostility between North and South Korea and the possibility of a military conflict which has unpredictable consequences, Washington's current nightmare is that within a year or even less than a year, the latest missile test and the previous one showed that North Korea might be very close to having a missile which can take a nuclear warhead which can reach America.
Right.
And that is a nightmare. Point number 2, which has already been alluded to, the US sees China as the only country which can actively intervene in North Korea and has the kind of influence that might make North Korea desist. But having said that, North Korea's behavior and its previous track record shows that even that is not really very certain. As the American perception was articulated by Nikki Haley in the UN when she said that we are not dealing with a rational person, a rational nation. So at the present moment, I think thoughts are going to be focused on this mess. China may or may not accommodate the US, although it has put certain pressures on North Korea recently. But the THAAD anti-missile system that is being put in place in South Korea has angered it. it feels it impinges on its security concerns. So this is something that is playing at the moment and looks as though it might I wouldn't use the word crisis, but certainly it's about the biggest political and security challenge that the US and China together seem to be facing, and you know, they'll have to work out a modus operandi to sort this out.
Absolutely.
But overall, China
Right.
and the US relations under President Trump in the US, I mean, throughout the campaign, he talked about China ripping off the US in trade and so on.
Right.
But at the present moment, the worries on trade and the worries on Chinese actions in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, which was actually high priority under the Obama administration,
Right.
where the Trans-Pacific Partnership from which President Trump has walked out of was actually a deal to put together a collection of countries which economically would not be subservient to China. But that has gone by the board. But
Right.
at the present moment, North Korea and the situation, the dangers it poses, as America sees it, seems to be
a larger
center
sort of
stage,
equation to
center
deal with at
stage,
this point,
yes.
more for safety. With regards to that, we talked about South China Sea, we talked about trade, as well as the concerns with Taiwan. Let me bring Brahma back into the conversation. Outside of the North Korea issue, there are certainly other things between U.S. and China that they're dealing with on a slew of things like we talked about. How essential are some of those in terms of frosting that relationship between U.S. and Chinese leaders? I mean, we've certainly seen that Trump is going to be hosting Xi Jinping next month in Florida, and Xi Jinping has also invited Trump to come to China, but a lot of other issues on the table. Brahma.
The Trump administration has signaled a tougher approach toward North Korea, but also a tougher approach toward Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea. So it will be an interesting balance that Washington will have to strike. On one hand, Washington wants China's increased cooperation to tame North Korea. On the other hand, Washington is clearly signaling that the US and the US military will adopt a tougher approach toward Chinese attempts to disturb the status quo in the South China Sea or in the East China Sea. How are they going to secure China's cooperation on North Korea,
Right.
while at the same time seeking to mount greater pressure on China in the South and East China Seas remains to be seen. But on North Korea, it's important to remember that for more than a decade now, all diplomatic talks with Pyongyang have been cut off. And in this 10-year period, North Korea has advanced its nuclear weapon and missile capabilities significantly. This latest rocket test, whatever it might mean, we should not forget the bigger picture, which is that North Korea's WMD capabilities have grown significantly in the period when all diplomatic contact with Pyongyang was frozen. So we
Right.
need a new approach towards North Korea. This approach which successive US administrations have pursued, which is a sanctions-only approach towards North Korea, that approach has failed. We need
right.
a new approach that has to be sanctions with engagement.
Right. All right. Well, unfortunately, this discussion can continue on, but we are out of time here on Gravitas. I would like to thank our panel of guests for weighing in on U.S.-Germany as well as U.S.-China relations. Thank you to everybody. Glenn Carl from Boston, Shiv Shankar Mukherjee here in New Delhi, as well as Brahma Chalani. We appreciate all of your perspectives. Certainly, it's going to be a wait-and-watch game. What will Donald Trump do? Not even 100 days in office, and lots of developments on the international front. Well, we'll have to wait and find out those answers. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for watching Gravitas. Good night.